दो दिलों की प्रेम कहानी ले आई हमको कहाँ, इन लकीरों में मिलना अपना था पहले से ही लिखा, हमारे मिलन को जो तरसे नैना इन्हें आज ना रोकना, जुदा हम न होंगे करो हमसे वादा, मेरा हाथ ना छोड़ना, तुम्हें आज पाएंगे या मर ही जाएंगे, ये ख्वाब ना तोड़ना। আমি যে তোমার, শুধু যে তোমার, আমি যে তোমার। Hello, 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 my lads and my ladies, my boys and my girls, cats, dogs, frogs, rabbits, birds of all feathers, fish in aquarium or in gold bowls. Welcome back to the second and concluding half of the episode we started last fortnight called I'll Wait by Heaven's Door. It is, as you'd all remember, a beautiful, tragic and legendary royal love story based in Belarus, where I happen to be posted as India's ambassador for 3 wonderful, happy years, and for which I still have a lot of affection. So if there are any Belarusians out there who are watching this particular episode, I love you all. So let's just do a little quick recap of where we left off the story last time. You'd remember that King Sigismund Augustus mourned terribly the untimely loss and death of his beloved wife Barbara Radziwiłł, who he didn't know but who had been poisoned by his own mother. And he, therefore, while mourning her loss, drew even closer to her 2 brothers, Nikolaj and Jan, and together the 3 of them came up with something really bold, daring, spiritual, and in the eyes of the church, utterly blasphemous. So today, after a fortnight's gap, and I know that all of you have been biting your fingernails to the quick, wondering what happened and why is this supposed to be a spooky story. So today we are going to pander to your curiosity and tell you all about what happened after that. Now, before we proceed to the story itself, I know that very few of you would have noticed that, but in part 1 of this tale, I mentioned that all this happened in 1500 something BCE, which is the wrong term because BCE implies before the Christian era. What I meant was 1500 something CE, that is the Christian era. So this story is just about 500 years old, not 2500 as many of you, if you were paying attention, would have presumed. So let's get ahead with what happened to Sigismund and his beloved Barbara, as this idea that had taken root in Sigismund's heart grew ever stronger. The concept was unusual, to say the least, and abhorrent to the sensibilities and dogmas of the Catholic Church of that time, even today, I presume. But has true love ever cared for religious taboos or social conventions? True, most such intense love stories, Romeo and Juliet, Laila Majnu, Shri Farhad, Sohini Mahiwal, and scores of others from around the world, are confined to the very young. The 16 and 17-year-olds with raging hormones, Caradam attitude, and total disregard for their own skin. Now, I'm not suggesting at all that older people cannot fall in love just as deeply. Many of you may have, for all I know. Not too many of the older lot, however, display the same level of insanity. Our Sigismund, however, was clearly an exception. Not to be cynical, but it probably suited Barbara's brothers to encourage his all-consuming passion for the sister. The surreal and outrageous idea that they collectively came up with was this: they would find a medium, someone who can summon a spirit, in this case Barbara's spirit, back from the other world, either to speak through their mouths or in person, so to say. Now, Sigismund knew that Barbara was gone forever. But this way, he'd at least get to see his beloved wife just one more time. Tell her how desperately he missed her. Perhaps hear her voice again. And hopefully find closure of a sort and a modicum of peace. Barbara's brother Mikolaj volunteered to look for a medium who could be trusted to be discreet, particularly since the Catholic Church was already unhappy with the king for having disregarded their earlier suggestion, you remember, about the divorce, and would thoroughly disapprove of the blasphemous venture they were now contemplating. The séance and the summoning would take place in secret, therefore, at the Neswish castle, where the Radziwiills called the shots, and Sigismund would join the proceedings without anyone else being the wiser. And so it was done. Mikolaj and his brother Jan located not just a medium, but a sorcerer. The infamous and greatly feared Pan, or Lord Twardowski, as he was called. Reputed to have sold his soul to the devil in return for vast spiritual, shall we say, power, he agreed to summon the dead queen's spirit and to keep the matter quiet. In return for a generous remuneration, of course, and to oblige some very powerful people. A date was chosen for the séance, and Sigismund was duly informed. He, of course, arrived promptly, his heart in his eyes, and every breath he drew, repeating Barbara's name like a litany, like a prayer. Since midnight is the time when the veil between the two worlds becomes porous, shall we say, that was the hour chosen by Twardowski to do the summoning. All but the most trusted of the castle's servants were given the evening off. As the hour approached, Sigismund watched the elaborate preparations underway with almost feverish anticipation, barely able to sit still. Mikolaj and Jan did their best to soothe and distract him, probably keeping their fingers crossed and hoping that the sorcerer was as good as his fearsome reputation. They had no idea what the king would do if the bizarre experiment didn't succeed. Would he turn his disappointment and anger on Twardowski if he failed to deliver? On them as a punishment for not keeping their word? Or on himself as some sort of self-castigation? As they watched the candles flare and the sorcerer slip into a trance as he chanted under his breath, each man was on edge for different reasons, coiled as tight as a spring. With just a few minutes to go before the clock struck midnight, tung, 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 the Ghost Whisperer opened deep, dark eyes, already drunk on visions of the other world, and looked straight at Sigismund. "Your lady," he whispered in a raspy voice, "is near, as eager to see you as you are to meet her. At the stroke of midnight, she will walk through the veil between the worlds and stand here before your eyes. You will see her just the way she was when you first fell in love with her. Nary a trace of the foul disease that consumed her before her time. You can look your fill, Majesty, and speak with her to your heart's content. For she will listen to your grief and share hers with you. If you have any questions for her, go ahead and ask them. I can feel her willingness, even eagerness, to respond. She may not stay for very long, since the passage between the worlds stays open for only a brief while. But it will be long enough for you to find solace. There is one warning, though, that I must reiterate and underline for all of you, my lords," he added sternly, his gaze sharpening to encompass all three, but lingering the longest on Sigismund's pale, intense face. No matter what happens, no matter how tempted you are, do not touch the Queen's shade. That is totally and strictly forbidden under the rules of this game. Any deviation may have dire consequences, not just for you, gentlemen, but also for the lady you all love so much. And who knows, perhaps for all whose lives are tied to this castle. I need your solemn oath that you will keep your distance from the spectre. I'm summoning her at your insistence in its own form rather than allowing it to possess my body and speak through my voice, which would be far easier and less perilous for all concerned. Your word now, my king, my lords. It's almost time. The brothers murmured their promises immediately before turning their gazes towards Sigismund, who stood silent for another minute. There was naked longing in his eyes as he thought of the surreal moment to come, when his Barbara would once again stand before him in all her glowing loveliness. Mikolaj exchanged an anxious look with John as they both wondered if the king would refuse to accept the condition. Twardowski, however, stared sternly at Sigismund and commanded in an uncompromising tone, "I need your promise, Majesty. If you are unable or unwilling to accept this one unbreakable condition, I shall not proceed any further. If you wish to interact with the spirit world, you must follow its rules. Do I have your word that you will not attempt to touch the apparition when it appears before you?" Sigismund closed his eyes and drew a shaky breath. "Yes," he whispered, the agony in his voice breaking the hearts of his two friends. "Yes, I promise I shall not attempt to touch her. Go ahead, man, and summon my wife back into this lonely world she's abandoned me in." Reassured, the sorcerer closed his eyes and resumed the chanting as the men waited tensely, wondering if it was all a hoax after all. But just as the clock tower began to toll the midnight hour, the hundreds of candles the servants had lit around the chamber began to flicker wildly. The silken curtains fluttered in a wind none could feel, and the chandeliers began to sway and twirl. apprehension and hope filming their eyes, Sigismund and his brothers-in-law stared at the disturbance around them. They glanced repeatedly at the spiritualist sitting a few feet away, eyes closed and mouth moving constantly as he whispered unfamiliar words in a language they didn't understand. As the last stroke of the bell resounded through the silent night, a shimmering shadow flickered into existence before them. So insubstantial that it took them a while to realize that it wasn't just a trick of the light. The king gasped, and the two noblemen looked at each other in dawning astonishment as the shadow began to acquire shape and depth, transforming first into a vaguely feminine figure, colors swirling around it. Even as they watched in absolute fascination, the form solidified into a woman's hourglass figure, draped in silver and blue, Barbara's favorite hues, with long chestnut curls flowing down her back and a delicate sapphire and diamond coronet glinting on her forehead. The features formed slowly, as though a sculptor's deft fingers were at work molding clay. And then, finally, the woman they had all longed to see again stood before them, all in her unmarred glory. Stunningly lovely and radiant with youth, her skin as unblemished as it had been before the disease struck her down and stole her beauty. So real did she look, so exactly like the woman they all remembered so clearly and dearly, that it was impossible to believe that she was merely an apparition, a shade with no substance, a vision that would fade away once its allotted time on this side of the veil was over. The unnatural wind died down, and the candles and the chandeliers stopped flickering and swaying, and an intense silence reigned over the chamber. All three aristocrats in the room stared at their unearthly visitor with great love and wistfulness in their hearts. But the spectre had eyes only for Sigismund. Even in death, Barbara's love for her husband glimmered in her eyes like unshed tears. The mutual longing and passion of the two star-crossed lovers electrified the very air, crackling and snapping around the others in the room, to whose presence Sigismund and Barbara's shade appeared oblivious. Twardowski, eyes glowing with the power he had channeled through himself to help the spirit cross the door between worlds, spoke in a resonant voice. "You may now say what you wish to your Queen, Majesty, and ask her whatever questions are troubling you. She is not permitted to initiate a conversation, but she is allowed to respond. Do not waste time. She can be here for only a few minutes, perhaps a quarter hour, before being compelled to return to the other side, where she now belongs." "Barbara, Kochania," breathed Sigismund, warm tears flowing down his face as his eyes drank in the beloved features, and his body grew hot and then cold with despairing longing. "Why did you leave me so soon? Even 6 lifetimes with you would not have been enough, but a mere 6 months? How could you do that to me, my heart, knowing full well that I would be like the living dead without you at my side? Oh, Sigismund, my darling husband," sighed the apparition, her face collapsing into lines of deep sorrow as she lifted a slender white hand as though reaching out to him, the other settling on her heart. "Do not blame me for abandoning you, for I was not at fault. My love for you was never second to yours for me. You know that well, Sigismund. 6 lifetimes, you say? Even 6 times 6 would have been insufficient for me to show you how much I care. Had it been my choice, I would have died in the same moment as you, so as to spare both of us the agony of separation. But it does not always work that way, does it? Perhaps it was already my time, while you still had things left to do in this world. Or perhaps I was forced to depart before time because some others could not abide our love and devotion to one another and decided to sunder us. Either way, I'm sorry for leaving you so alone. Kochanie, know that my sorrow at our untimely parting is as intense as yours. Even in the afterlife, I cannot find peace without you. The brothers got it first. The statement about others taking steps to separate the lovers. They already had their suspicions, which their sister's ghost appeared to confirm. "Which others, my sister?" demanded John, speaking directly to the ethereal figure glowing before them. "Was something done to hasten your passage into the other world? By whom?" The shade seemed to notice the other two men for the first time. "Jan," sighed Barbara, smiling mistily at her brothers. "Nikolaj, thank you for taking care of my beloved Sigismund after my death. I love you both. As for whether my departure was hastened, well, just because I'm dead, I have not become omniscient, you know." There was humor in her voice, of the kind she had often used to tease her adoring siblings when she was alive. "All I can say for certain is that what ailed me for all those agonizing months was not a disease that infected me from outside. Of that I'm certain. It was something that felt different, far more malignant and, well, deliberate. I tried to fight it, oh so hard, using all my will and strength to get better. It would overwhelm my efforts, hitting back with a vengeance, eating away at my body, making me more and more ill. "Poison," croaked Nikolaj, and a startled Sigismund tore his gaze away from his wife's beloved features for the first time to look at her grim-faced brothers. "You were poisoned, Barbara, slowly and steadily, and we didn't even realize what was happening. Somebody who was part of your personal staff, responsible for your comfort, was bought with coin or turned by somebody who held perhaps the power of life and death over that person. Venom was fed to you through the victuals and water you partook, or maybe through the lotions and potions and perfumes that you women use to enhance your beauty. There was talk of this in some quarters of the royal court. Whispers only, but we should have listened and taken steps to remove you from that setup. We failed to do our duty by you, sister, and that shall always weigh like a stone on our hearts." Shocked and horrified, Sigismund stared at the other man, so passionate in his conviction. "That cannot possibly... How, man? Barbara was my queen. Who would dare harm her in that manner? Who would wield that kind of power over Barbara's personal retinue to buy or threaten them into murdering the Polish queen and remain above suspicion themselves? Ask yourself that question, Majesty." Jan growled softly, his face pale with fury. "Do you not know who resented your marriage to her sister so deeply that she left the country rather than look at you as a couple every day? Have you not heard the idiom that hell hath no fury like a woman scorned? Do you not know of the fierce passions that rage in the Italian blood? setting it aflame when an insult or a threat is perceived, whether real or imagined? And are you not aware that in the Queen Mother's country, the Sforzas have been daggers drawn with the Borgias for a long time? And that they have, along the way, learnt a few things from their sworn enemies, including the fine art of poisoning. Did it never occur to you that something along those lines could happen to Barbara too? Or did your love for your mother blind you to the threat to your wife? No, breathed Sigismund. No, I refuse to believe that. Even if Barbara was poisoned, as you say, it was at someone else's behest. Someone who had reason to hate her, be jealous of her beauty and of my love for her. There you go, Majesty. Mikolaj growled, his eyes grim. I myself could not have described Queen Bona Sforza better. For a moment, the king stared at his brother-in-law, resentment battling uncertainty in his breast. Impulsively, convulsively, he returned his gaze to the apparition's glowing countenance. Barbara, moja milość, if you were deliberately poisoned, tell us. Tell me, who did that? I cannot believe that my own mother. I know that she was dead set against our marriage, but she would never. Or did she? Did her dislike of you so overshadow her love for me that she didn't stop to think of my agony at losing you? Tell me, kochanie, and by everything I hold sacred, I swear to you that your murderer will not escape the sword of justice. Even if it was my mother who. Just tell me, please. Barbara's eyes shimmered with tears as she gazed at the wretched man pleading with her. Alas, husband, she responded. I did not know then, and I'm still not certain. All I can say is that my soul is yet to find peace because of my unnatural end. I must place my trust in you, Sigismund, and in my dear brothers to find the culprit and avenge my murder. I cannot. The candlelight suddenly dimmed, and the air turned cold and heavy. It is time, my king, Twardowski called out softly. Your queen's spirit must cross the veil again, for the respite granted to her has come to an end. You must, all three of you, bid her farewell now, for she has but a few moments left before she sheds this tangible form. Her smile tender and her eyes wistful, Barbara looked at her brothers first, placing her hands on her heart in loving farewell. Then she stretched out her arms towards her pale, trembling husband. "I wish you a long and glorious life, Sigismund," she said in the sweet voice he remembered so well. "Serve your people and make your reign memorable. But when the day of your crossing over finally arrives, however many years in the future, you shall find me waiting for you at heaven's door. I shall take your hand and smile at you with my heart in my eyes and gently lead you into the light. And then we shall be together forever. When you miss me most deeply, do not weep, husband. Instead, recall this promise I have made you today and be joyful. Do widzenia, moja miłość. Goodbye." And suddenly, shockingly, Sigismund cried out in sheer agony. His heart breaking all over again as he anticipated the departure of this final manifestation of his beloved spirit. She might wait for him at heaven's door as she had promised, but he knew that he would never see her again in this life, in this world. In that moment, he forgot the sorcerer's warning, didn't even think of his solemn oath that he would not try to touch the apparition, and didn't give a damn for the dire consequences. The love of his life was leaving him again, and he simply could not bear it. Overwhelmed, racked with renewed grief and stretched to breaking point, he heard neither the sorcerer's horrified cry nor the shouts of the other two men as he raced blindly across the chamber to where Barbara's ghost shimmered, mere seconds away from fading into the ether. Jan and Mikolaj tried to hold him back, but he was like a man possessed, slipping through their fingers like an eel. "Barbara, no!" he sobbed, his hands already reaching for her. "Don't go. Do not leave me alone again. I beg you." In the next instant, his hands curled beseechingly around her arms and passed right through them, clasping nothing but light and colors that had swirled together into her shape. For a long moment, the air itself seemed to hold its breath as the man and the shade stared at each other. Sigismund blinked in surprise and then in growing consternation as he realized what he had done. Barbara's wraith, on the other hand, rippled in and out of focus, arms wrapped protectively around herself as she writhed in what looked like intense pain. The beautiful colors bled out of her illusory form to leave her draped in unrelieved black. Even as the 4 people in the chamber looked on in horror, Barbara lifted a pleading hand towards Sigismund. "What have you done, my love?" she whispered despairingly, her skin ghostly white and translucent. "By your touch am I trapped here forever, between worlds. I cannot cross to the other side, and nor can I come back to life. Alas, alas, I'm doomed, doomed, my love, and damned by fate to never know peace again." A dissonant, discordant sound, like the cracking of a great bell, filled the castle as the spirit faded from view, its wailing like a dagger plunged into Sigismund's gut, cruelly twisted. The roar that burst from him was a heartbreaking cocktail of guilt, grief, self-loathing and despair. The Radziwill brothers wept silently as the true horror of their beloved sister's eternity sank in, along with remorse for the part they had played in her summoning, and therefore in her damnation. True, it was Sigismund who had violated the laws of the spirit world by touching the ghost, but had they not encouraged his morbid obsession and found Twardowski for him, Barbara would still be resting in peace. Unfulfilled and unavenged perhaps, but safe within the light. Now, thanks to what the 3 of them had wrought together in the name of love, her soul would forever be deprived of a chance at resurrection, or, as the pagans believed, reincarnation. The very next day, a hollow-eyed Sigismund returned to the royal palace in Krakow, heart heavy as a stone in his breast. He never went back to Neshwitz, unable to face the terrible consequences of his action, holding himself responsible not only for Barbara's eternal punishment, but also for his own consequent one. Since his spirit was now barred from the other world, he was doomed never to see her again, not even at heaven's door, as she had promised him before his momentary insanity had caused him to lose her forever. Her memories haunted his palace, while her ghost haunted her family's castle. Evidently, he preferred the bleak loneliness of the former to the awful regret pervading the latter. Despite the urgings of his courtiers, his subjects, his church, and his mother, whom he could neither accuse nor forgive, since the speculations of a phantom could not really be treated as proof, right? But anyway, despite the urgings of all these people, he refused initially to marry again. However, 2 years after Barbara's death, he was somehow persuaded to do his duty and wed Catherine of Austria for the sake of an heir. No child was conceived, though. Through the 2 decades that the marriage lasted. Perhaps because he had no love, no passion, and no joy to spare for his new bride. Poor thing. The bride, I mean. Sigismund's rule is regarded as the golden era in Poland's history, for he poured his entire energy into the betterment of his country and his people. Art, culture, craftsmanship, and trade flourished during his reign. Minorities were treated well, something that is rare in European history, and overall good relations were maintained with neighboring kingdoms. He even oversaw the unification of Poland with the Grand Duchy of Lithuania through the Treaty of Lublin, signed in 1569, and the establishment of the Polish-Lithuanian Commonwealth with an elected monarchy. Novel concept, right? Perhaps that was his tribute to Barbara, whose spirit had wished him, remember, a long and glorious life during their final encounter. His death in 1572, at the relatively young age of 52, was deeply mourned, and he was buried with great pomp and show at the Wawel Cathedral in Krakow. The crown was then passed on to Henry of Valois, the second elected monarch after Sigismund himself, to rule the Commonwealth. Prosaic stories about Sigismund's death abound. Stories of ill health ranging from gout and kidney stones to tuberculosis and even venereal diseases. Stories of infertility caused by his early bout with malaria and his dissipated lifestyle in later years. You can accept that explanation if you prefer, but doesn't it strike you as a contradiction in terms? A man who could love a woman with such passion, such devotion, and such abundance. Can you really see him as some sort of depraved Casanova? I can't. So I prefer to believe that he died ultimately of a broken heart, eaten up by guilt and loneliness. That is why there is a legend surrounding him as well. Yeah. They say that on dark and moonless nights, Sigismund's ghost roams the royal palace in Krakow, looking for his lost love and waiting to be reunited with her. I like to think that he was offered salvation and refused it, because without Barbara by his side, even heaven was not worth his while. Instead, he voluntarily chose to inflict the same punishment on himself, roaming the in-between realm where he waits and hopes for the day his love completes the term of a spiritual exile and is finally free to walk through heaven's door hand in hand with him. In the meanwhile, the restless shade of Barbara Radziwiłł wanders the halls and corridors of the castle where she grew up and where she was trapped by a single thoughtless moment. In the intervening 4.5 centuries, she has come to be known as the Chornaya Panna, or the Black Lady of Neschwitz, and has been observed by far too many people to be dismissed as a mere fragment of someone's imagination. In fact, she was seen so frequently by the invading German soldiers billeted at Neschwitz during the Second World War that many of them went slightly bananas and began shooting wildly at any and every shadow, suspecting it to be the Chornaya Panna. She usually appears in the small hours of the morning, perhaps replicating the hour when she was cursed for no fault of hers. Quite often, the vision portends something unpleasant. War, a disease maybe, a natural disaster of some kind. Perhaps the most well-documented appearance of the Black Lady pertains to the breakout of countless fires across Belarus's depleted peatlands and bogs as lately as 2002. The apparition was clearly seen by many, weeping quietly as she seemed to wait for something terrible to happen. And it did. During the following 22 years, the sightings have continued off and on. It's never a threatening experience. The ghost merely looks melancholy, and when it signals some looming calamity, anxious and fretful. We cannot be sure if the Black Lady is aware of her husband's similar vigil in distant Krakow. But all who love a mystical legend and a tragic love story would agree that the two have suffered long enough. It is time they were forgiven for their sin, if sin it can be called, of excessive passion and obsessive love, and are allowed to reunite for eternity. Now, I'm not a Catholic, and my faith not just allows for, but actually celebrates the evolutionary journey of every soul through innumerable rebirths. In each new life, the soul learns yet another lesson, bringing it another step closer to moksha, or the final remerger with the divine. I don't know about you, but I'm certainly hoping that Sigismund and Barbara will soon reincarnate in new bodies with new personalities, and somehow, somewhere, will meet again. Whether they choose to be lovers or best friends in that next life, for I cannot really see them as siblings or parent-child, I'm keeping my fingers crossed that they'd be able to handle things better with sense as well as sensibility, controlling that strong passion rather than being controlled by it. Tragic love stories may be the stuff of legends, but being able to spend a full and happy life together may, in the end, be far more satisfying. Don't you agree? Better at any rate than haunting two different castles for long, lonely centuries. And thus, we come to the end of this heart-rending story of the Black Lady of Neschwitz, told my way. There are several versions of the story, some more mundane than others, but I have based this retelling on the one I like best. I hope it gave you moments across the entire emotional spectrum, from joy to sadness, from fear to anger, and from passion to pity. If you enjoyed this ethereal tale from Belarus, do give it a thumbs up, won't you? And leave a comment to let me and YouTube know that you like what you're watching on Tattle Tales with Sangeeta Bahadur. In case you still haven't subscribed to the channel, please do so now. And if you also press the bell icon, you will be notified about new episodes every time they come out. Links to early episodes are given in the description below. So if you have missed any of the previous stories, several of them, let me remind you, based on real spooky experiences shared with me by family and friends, do go watch. Oh, and incidentally, in case you're wondering why I'm not wearing a sari today as I usually do, and which I love doing, there are two good reasons. One, I thought this totally black outfit would, be in character for this tale, this legend of the Black Lady of Neschwitz. And secondly, and much more mundanely, it's because when I'm recording this particular episode, it's just so frightfully cold in Delhi NCR, where I live, that it's impossible to even think of wearing a sari, which would obviously not cover me the way this particular outfit is doing. So that is the reason. Okay, so meanwhile, take care of yourselves till we meet again next month on the first Friday of February. Because this month of January has 5 Fridays, but since my program goes out on the first Friday and the third Friday of every month, you will find that there'll be a gap of around 3 weeks before you come to the next story, which will be released on the first Friday of February, as always. Meanwhile, до свидания. Moi друзья. I'll see you soon.